Welcome to the Retail Focus Podcast, a weekly collection of news, interviews, and information from the world of retail. Here are your hosts, Trent Kling and Leighton Kling.
Hello, welcome to this edition of the Retail Focus Podcast. We're here in mid-September. You're with Trent and Leighton Kling. Coming up, we're going to talk about not only a West Coast supermarket chain closing their in-store pharmacies, but we'll be talking about other pharmacy issues that have cropped up in this past week, specifically with Walgreens and Fred's Pharmacy. Target plans on adding a ton of employees for this holiday season, and we'll also discuss tailored brands. Our interview guest is Matt MacInnis. He is the CEO and co-founder of Inkling. He's going to talk about retail training strategies, and more specifically, things his company has done in some interesting retail spaces, including the C-store space. Make sure and check that out later on in the show. We've seen the feedback on Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud for the podcast. Greatly appreciate everyone who's taken the time to rate or subscribe. You can also find us on Spotify. That's right, we are on Spotify. I know just about everyone has a Spotify account. You can check us out there. If you haven't had the chance to rate us, like us, however you find us, you can do so at any time. Remember, we're on Instagram and Twitter. Both are at Retail Podcast. We're brought to you this week by Productsup.io, myemma.com, and AdRoll, the e-commerce growth platform. Again, not a lot of earnings this week, so we start out with Stater Brothers, a supermarket chain, California-based. They're closing their in-store pharmacies. And we begin with this regional grocery news because it kind of caught us off guard. Let's talk a little bit about Stater Brothers. They're very regional. All of their 171 locations in Southern California. And Leighton, they were actually founded by twins back in the 1930s.
Yeah, Cleo and Leo Stater, after they bought a grocery store in the mid-1930s. In fact, the last time we discussed them on the podcast, we talked about the passing of their longtime executive chairman, Jack H. Brown, who grew the company by leaps and bounds after his appointment in 1981. Pete Van Helden, who took over just prior to Brown's death in 2016, is actually the current president and CEO of the company. Stater Brothers, they're privately held, so they don't make it to the news all that often, which is a big reason why we don't talk about them all that much on this podcast. We like to talk about publicly traded companies more often when we have more publicly available information. So we go on investor relations pages. You can't do that with this Stater Brothers company. So the company is actually in the midst of a revitalization plan for a number of their stores, hosting grand reopenings in the regions in which they operate. The revitalizations include new flooring, new LED lighting, and more grab-and-go foods and a larger wine and beer selection. We all know Trent likes his wine and beer. Recall the conversation we had back in January of this year with a former Walmart executive. He talked about LED cost savings and how a lot of stores are retrofitting to save money, not only with the lighting costs themselves, as LEDs actually cost a lot less to operate, you have to replace them a lot less, but also the cooling costs associated with LED lights. So fluorescents, if you think about the long-standing fluorescents that are in a number of stores still, they actually emit quite a bit of heat. And of course, cooling costs are a big issue in Southern California, an area in which Stater Brothers does a lot of business.
So now that we've set this up a little bit, let's talk about these closures. It's important to establish that despite the fact that there are 171 stores, again, in Stater Brothers' system, only 22 of those had pharmacies. So despite the fact that the headline kind of caught us off guard, when you did a little bit more digging, it didn't impact quite as many stores as one might think. The pharmacies operate under the Super RX banner, and all of the pharmacies will close by September 28th, which is a fairly fast turnaround for the closures given the timing of the announcement this week. As is typically the case with pharmacy closures, Stater Brothers has found a suitor for the records and assets. These are hot commodities in the pharmacy world, especially given the, formerly three competitors, although Rite Aid has been neutered somewhat in terms of their overall power, but you figure Walgreens and CVS would be going after the assets, even though we're only talking about 22 pharmacies worth of assets, still rather important, and CVS in this case is the winner of the bidding. They've reached an agreement with Stater Brothers for things like customer lists, histories, and more, and we can't know exactly how many customers will be shuttled over to CVS or will stay with CVS will be retained by CVS. But it is certainly a win anytime a pharmacy chain is able to acquire assets such as this. Customers, by the way, will be notified by mail when their scripts are transferred officially to CVS. So those on automatic renewal for their scripts, they'll get transferred automatically to CVS, and they'll have to then call CVS or get them moved by calling the doctor to another pharmacy. Additionally, Stater Brothers said that CVS is looking into potentially hiring pharmacists and pharmacy techs from the Super RX location so as to mitigate any employee impacts. On that front, Stater Brothers has said they're actually committed to offer pharmacists and pharmacy techs continued pay and benefits for a time as they find other positions within the Southern California community. So the natural question we get to here is, why make a change? Well, some stores see the pharmacy as an integral driver of margins, and for others, it can be a burden in terms of staffing and regulation. And when you're talking about a chain that's got fewer than 15% of their stores with pharmacies, we can see how this might be a burden from an HR standpoint, because you're hiring from completely unique positions. You're hiring pharmacists and pharmacy techs, which is outside the realm of what you would typically be hiring for the rest of your stores. Additionally, increased numbers of generics in recent years, along with regulatory changes and some reimbursement programs, specifically reimbursement programs with Medicare and Medicaid, have cut into those once solid margins for places like grocery stores that are operating pharmacies. CEO Pete Van Helden referenced using the freed up space. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about square footage now, not just the money that's pouring into it, for growing areas of their core food business. Leighton discussed some of the renovations they're doing in their existing stores, and they're planning to use this space for re-energizing their food segment. He mentioned the shifting grocery preferences of their customers, Van Helden did in a press release. No doubt one of the reasons they've embarked on this store re-imaging in certain markets over the past few months. So when you're talking about using this freed up space, again, a little bit more ready-to-eat food, maybe that robust beer and wine selection that Leighton was talking about, either way, it's going to be used as part of their overall brand re-imaging in these 22 stores.
The company was careful to note that in-store operations, other than the pharmacy, of course, will remain unchanged after the closures. Ultimately, this is just another domino in the increasingly consolidated pharmacy industry. We've often heard of a lot of change going on, and it is interesting that Stater Brothers chose to convert the pharmacy space into sales floor space for food rather than just outsourcing the pharmacy services as others have done. I personally think of Target selling its pharmacies to CVS to focus more on their core competencies. And at first, Trent, you and I both questioned that move. We questioned, well, the pharmacy for Target was a profitable area, but they have worked it out. They've worked it out in such a way where they have been able to focus on the other areas of the store, and you have to believe that that's exactly what Stater Brothers is looking to do here. Either way, for those in Southern California, it bears keeping an eye on. Will these particular stores add features like more ready-to-eat options, or will they simply expand inventory and consumer choice going forward?
After months of strategizing and prepping budgets and looking at how we're going to position ourselves in the market, I didn't have anyone to fall back on. And I remember pulling the lever for all those campaigns, biting my nails, and just staring at the computer pretty much the entire day. This was the moment where, okay, we hired this guy to do exactly what he's saying. Now it's up to him to deliver. Trying to figure out the best way to serve ads to our customers. To me, it was a black box. AdRoll came in and said, we should target these users at this cadence, this frequency. We doubled our revenue based on what we were projecting for November, December. Succeeding after I've put myself on the line like that, it does give me confidence.
To find out how TeePublic and 37,000 other brands grow their businesses with AdRoll, visit adroll.com/retail. That's ADROLL.com/retail.
Well, we move on with our one and only earnings call this week in Tailored Brands as they release their quarterly earnings Wednesday, this week after market close. Where other retailers are doing well across all sectors, some of the ones that have been hit the hardest in terms of traffic declines over the past few years have actually been at least meeting their own expectations as of late during their most recently quarterly calls in 2018. This meeting of expectations was more or less the case here with Tailored Brands during their second quarter earnings release. Tailored Brands, by the way, consists of several well-known dress attire brands that you may be familiar with. Under their umbrella, they have Men's Warehouse, Joseph A. Bank, Twin Hill, Alexandra, and several more. A lot of people recognize them for the Men's Warehouse brand, but you see that they have a lot to deal with and a lot of changing dynamic in their space, a lot to get into here and unpack. Zacks consensus earnings per share estimates were $1.07 heading into the call. They came in at $1.14 in the same quarter last year, so we have to put that perspective here for their earnings per share. For this latest quarter, however, their results echoed those analyst forecasts on the adjusted earnings per share front. So they hit the $1.07 expectation right on the head. This will be actually the first time in 4 quarters where they did not beat consensus earnings per share forecast. So that could be looked at as sort of a downside, but at least they did meet those analyst expectations from Wall Street. Their GAAP earnings per share hit 97 cents thanks to several one-time charges that we consistently see from this company and many others in this space that included a divestment of a cleaners company and a distribution center for their rental business. And you have to dig a little bit further as to what rental means. Well, they rent a lot of suits and tuxes. Their suit rental business has actually declined year over year by double digits. And that was the case this quarter. So this was bound to be a write-off sooner or later. This was a massive warehouse. It was an over $4 million write-off, Trent, meaning that they probably had a massive outstanding balance on that lease. So that lease settlement, extremely expensive in the short term, but they're looking to save in the long term because this is a business they are slowly getting out of. A big plus for Tailored Brands was that they reiterated full year guidance. So despite these one-time write-offs, despite everything else that has been going on in terms of transitioning strategy for the business, they made sure to reassure shareholders that everything was in line with previous expectations, at least internal expectations. While the retailer was a bit more profitable year over year in terms of earnings per share, they missed revenue marks and also brought in $27 million less on that top line than the second quarter of last year, with $827 million in total sales for this year's second quarter. Their gross margins have also suffered, coming in a full percentage point, I believe 1.1% lower than this quarter last year.
Doug Ewert, the company's CEO, is actually set to retire on September 30th as well. As a result, he expressed his thanks to everyone on the call, said that he was pleased with what they as a company have been able to accomplish over the years. He's been CEO for about 7 years now and with the company in various roles since 1995. No new news on specific succession plans for the company, but Ewert said he was confident that their brands hold a certain elite status to ensure market position for years to come. The board, now tasked with finding a replacement, they'll be overseeing day-to-day operations after the end of this month. With that, Ewert and company, going back to the earnings call, they were proud to talk their positive average store comps. We say average because this is a broad metric for the aggregate of all store banners. Leighton mentioned all the banners they have in their store network. Same-store sales rose for the company by a mild 1.7%, and that's just about in line with year-over-year inflation for goods like this. It's aided by higher traffic, though, which is good to see, and average ticket. So the fact that there's a combination of these two, and it's not just average ticket fueling the same-store sales increase, that's a good sign. All banners were up, some obviously more than others, but most within that 1 to 3% range. Custom apparel sales were up as many people are wanting personalized treatment with their higher-end purchases, specifically with fitting, as fits have become increasingly important as we get into the later teens. Growing the custom suit business, an integral part of their strategy, and perhaps one of the things that they can focus on as they get away from the rental business increasingly, as Leighton discussed. They've made a conscious effort in connecting their online customer base as well with their in-store experience. They want to be able to better advise people on trending styles, but here's the key, getting them fitted properly. Basically, they're equivalent to the average retailer's omni-channel push, and they're trying to play catch-up here with a lot of brands that are out there that are providing custom fits to consumers. And we've talked to certainly management with some of those brands. Here, tailored brands starting to catch up with the tailored part. Their only real revenue drop-off was actually from their corporate sales business in the UK. This is why same-store sales were all positive, yet that total revenue fell versus 2017, and as Leighton talked about, fell a little bit short of analyst expectations.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about inventory per store, which is something that is actually more possible to mitigate now that they are doing more in the custom business. They don't need as many pieces on hand if they can just order it and tailor it within 2 days. Being more vertically integrated, by the way, has helped hasten the expected wait times for those customers getting those custom suits. Still, some suits can take as long as 3 to 4 weeks when they are brought from overseas. They talked about a lot of those suits coming in from Europe. They take sometimes longer than 3 to 4 weeks, but still something they are proud of as a differentiator when it comes to delivery, is having that optionality and being able to be quicker than all of their competitors in this space. And across all platforms, Trent, their custom suit business is now 20% of their overall business in suits. So it's a massive business and ever growing too. They are increasing the amount of custom in-store shops at Men's Warehouse by about 25%, from about 400 to about 500. They actually want to increase that long-term to around 550. It's a lot of custom in-store suit shops. This frees up all-important cash and enhances free cash flow because those suits don't, again, have to be on the balance sheet in terms of inventory, which they have been using, by the way, that extra cash to pay down debt rather aggressively. In their second quarter results, they actually touted this at the beginning of the release. They were able to reduce debt by about $70 million. That doesn't seem like a lot for a company that is as large as this one, but look at the last 4 quarters, Trent. $325 million cut in terms of long-term debt. As a percentage of sales, too, they've been doing a better job at really mitigating those advertising costs. They were down this quarter versus last quarter in 2017. The last second quarter, I should say, in 2017. Advertising expenditure hit 4.9% of sales, whereas historically it was at or above 5%. And what's really interesting here is you have to question, well, they have this new strategy of custom suits, having that personalized experience, as you said, Trent, but it seems as though advertising may be taking a backseat to actually taking care of their current core customer, or at least those recently acquired customers, taking care of them, really taking care of the employees who are going to then be taking care of those customers. And the old saying is really holding true for this company, in that your most valuable customer is usually your current one. It's not the one you're going to be spending all that advertising money on acquiring. You really have to focus on the people that have been coming to you time and time again for these all-important life events. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. They're trying to target those people that have always been going there to their shops and telling them, hey, we have all these new custom services. Try it. Try it, see if you like it. And again, it's trying to get away from renting, that old concept there where they're trying to rent for these special occasions. It's not as profitable, Trent. And honestly, it's really holding true that their strategy right now is paying off, at least in the short to midterm. They are also reinvesting in their different brands and store experience, trying to create value and build equity in their brand by having nice, well-lit shops. It's not just in their price point are they trying to reinvest, but the different services that they can provide and the quality of those services. And that is the key. Our customers coming away from these stores saying, you know what? I got my money's worth. Not just because the suit fits right, but because the overall experience was on point. I think that's extremely important for them. And between this hands-on strategy and aligning their balance sheet with the different cash flow efforts, I think they feel as though they have a strong Q3 ahead of them, as well as a Q4 and a solidified 2019. So despite potential turnover here with the CEO in about 2 weeks, it seems as though they are on the right track. The one question we have, though, is the new CEO coming on board. Again, it's a little unclear as to who's going to be there in terms of the succession plan, but you have to make sure that they adhere to at least the basic core strategies that are in front of them, that have been put in place in front of store management. Those same strategies that they've been executing on week after week. You can't send out contradictory messages as a new CEO. So it's extremely important for the board to acquire a new CEO that is on board with the vision that has been set forth throughout these prior quarters.
Momentum is one word you can use to describe the company's stock performance in particular, even though they had a brief hiccup in terms of analyst expectations in this quarter. The stock ticker TLRD is up 76% since the second quarter of last year. After hours trading on Wednesday propelled the stock up another 9%, where it currently sits around $26. This is a stock where many are going to question the future growth capability, and of course, they have aspects of the business that are thriving and growing, as Leighton has talked about, but arguably at the cost of other legacy divisions. And that question of long-term viability, or at least long-term growth rate, may help to explain their still relatively tepid price-to-earnings ratio of 11 times, at least tepid in this particular climate. They have a market cap, by the way, of $1.2 billion. Now, here's some advice for anyone that sends emails to their customers. Look, you deserve a better email marketing platform, one that's actually designed with your type of organization in mind. And unlike other email providers, Emma puts its customers first, offering powerful email marketing with a personal touch.
With Emma, you'll have everything you need to connect your data, build your audience, and do your most successful marketing ever. Because their easy-to-use platform makes advanced functionality accessible to everyone on your team with no technical skills required. You can even connect Emma with the services you count on to run your business every single day, like Salesforce and Google Analytics. Not to mention, Emma's award-winning team is always ready to support you on your email marketing strategy, design, list migration, and much more.
So put the power of email experts behind your marketing. Request a customized demo of Emma's email marketing platform today at myemma.com. Again, that's myemma, EMMA.com. We've talked in the past on the podcast about just how important retail training is, not only for brand representation, but also for employee retention, which can be crucial to reducing costs. Our guest today is here to discuss more about not only the next generation of training and onboarding, but also about workplace communication tools to make sure everyone within an organization is on the same page. Matt MacInnis joins us. He's the CEO and co-founder of Inkling, which provides tools that allows employers to engage their workforce. Matt, thanks so much for joining us here on the Retail Focus podcast. First, when and how did you guys see a need for a better way to not only train, but also communicate in the retail workplace?
Well, it was not a straight shot. We didn't start the company in the world of retail. In fact, we started the company way back in the world of textbooks, believe it or not. And over the course of years of effort, we kind of stumbled across an opportunity in the world of corporate training, and then further kind of refined the whole thesis to being really about frontline workers. And obviously retail is the single largest population of frontline workers in any category, and so retail has become a pretty important focus for us. The first customer, I think, that opened our eyes to the opportunity was Starbucks. They kind of called us and said, hey, we'd like to use your software for all of our district managers and store managers, and that was a bit of a surprise to us. It was in 2013 or so that we got that call. And we leaned in on it, as entrepreneurs do, to try and figure out whether there was a there there. And the next thing you know, we were working with Benefit Cosmetics and their boutiques, and we were working with Kohl's department stores across all of their locations, and kind of the rest is history. But we kind of stumbled into it and saw that with the trend toward mobile device use and the millennial mindset that is kind of pervasive across people of all ages, not just people born in the 80s, that there was a need for a new approach, and so we capitalized on the opportunity.
Yeah, that's something I want to touch on. You guys came from the background of textbooks, and your first client really in the retail space was Starbucks, but you guys have clients that are QSRs, you guys have clients that are full-service restaurants, you guys have clients that are retailers. Just how different is the approach from client to client that you guys service?
It's actually remarkably different. Even, I think it's disingenuous to just say retail. I mean, you've got groceries and C-stores and big box and soft side. It's like so many different subsegments that have idiosyncratic characteristics that really influence the way that people learn on the job and what kind of employee is hired. If you think about the Tiffany's employee, versus the McDonald's employee, they're of a very different profile most often. And, how they approach training and what they expect of their employer is really different. But technically, both McDonald's and Tiffany are in the retail world. So when we think about how we engage our customers, we first zoom out and say, okay, well, what segment are you in? What's the makeup of your employee base? What are the challenges that you guys face in your operation? And then how can we tailor the way we implement the platform to help you solve, whether it's for employee retention / turnover, whether it's about trying to induce sales or repeat sales for an existing client base through a clienteling application we set aside. There's a lot of different angles that we come at it from, and for sure, no single approach that works across even just the entire retail industry, to say nothing of all of the other segments that we serve. So it's diverse for sure.
I know you guys have served the C-store segment in particular and some rather large employers in the C-store segment in particular. That's not something we talk a lot about on the podcast, but very intriguing, certainly from an employee and communication standpoint. What challenges in particular does that segment kind of present to you?
Yeah, I think my favorite customer to talk about in the world of convenience stores is more than just a convenience store. It's Love's Travel Stops. So for any of your listeners who are in the Midwest, in maybe rural California, they've come across a Love's. And it's a full-service operation that provides, of course, the full convenience store experience 24/7. But they also they're a truck stop, so they provide services to long-distance drivers. Of course, they have refueling. In some locations now, they even operate hotels. And then they operate quick-serve restaurants on site. So if you stop in at a Love's Travel Stop, you refuel your vehicle, you can take a shower, you can go have a meal at Burger King that's on site or whatever. So there's a lot of different moving parts. And so they have some really interesting challenges, some of which are sort of common to the convenience store world, which is a relatively high employee turnover rate, the need to handle a lot of different things at once. If you operate a C-store, if you're the guy who's on the graveyard shift, you're dealing with ready-to-eat food items for 1 minute. You're dealing with restocking procedures the next minute. You're dealing with a broken freezy machine, so you got to be a mechanic. You're dealing with the cash count in the till. You're dealing with just such a huge variety of different things in your job. And at the same time, right, you're prone to quit just because of the nature of the work. And so they have to get their employees onboarded really quickly. They've got to get them skilled up on a really broad variety of tasks. And then they have to manage the execution of those tasks on a repeated basis across a whole set of different things, some of which are really regulatory related, like health and safety, food safety, that kind of thing. So it's a really complicated job to be the sole or one of two people who's on duty in the convenience store. And that's just the C-store angle. If you look at Love's, not just the C-store, now they've got the complexity of being a refueling station. So they've got to deal with the possibility of a chemical spill and how to deal with the delivery of diesel and gasoline into their storage tanks. They've got to deal with how the operation of the restaurants are happening. They've got to deal with the showers. I mean, so it's just a fascinating world, its own little city operating 24/7 with staff coming and going in different shifts. And so we love that complexity because Inkling helps you communicate with those employees, provide them with the communication they need to know what they've got to get done, and then tracking whether that stuff gets done in a digital way instead of pencil whipping a paper form 5 minutes before the end of your shift.
You talk about Love's or the C-store industry in particular as an industry that's struggled historically with retention numbers, and we discuss retention a lot on the podcast, usually as it pertains to cutting costs for employers. From your perspective, what are the best ways to retain quality employees and not necessarily only retain them, but assist them in moving up the system or maybe learning other positions, as you say, with Love's as well?
Yeah, well, an employee who's growing is an employee who's happy, and an employee who's stagnant is an employee who's on the way out. I mean, this is true of a white-collar job as a software engineer. It's true of the front desk receptionist, and it's true of somebody in a retail job. We all, as individuals, want to feel like we're growing, and the question is, how do we provide growth to people in their jobs when not everyone can become a manager tomorrow? There's only so much that can be done in terms of job promotion. And, I think the challenge of employee turnover and retention is, of course, fundamentally a financial issue. You want to retain your employees as long as possible because the cost of going out and hiring a replacement and training that person up is really high. But I think we've also come to learn that the best employee experiences are the things that create the best customer experiences. And So providing not just sort of a quick onboarding, but giving people the opportunity to grow within the role, to learn things outside of the scope of their job just because it's to help them feel like they're growing personally, and to engage them in the value of the brand, to help them understand why it matters to work at the company that they work for, why they want to feel or how they should feel connected to that brand. Those are all really important ingredients to having somebody stay in the job longer. And that in turn, of course, as an experienced employee, creates a better end customer experience. And that's the ultimate goal, is to have your customers come back and shop with you again. So we look at the full life cycle of an employee's journey within one of our customers and say, how can our product make them more successful in getting things done? But how can we also make them a happier person at work? By making things easier and less cumbersome, by engaging them with video assets instead of binders. It's just really basic stuff that I think we all take for granted in white-collar jobs that are really difficult to come by when you're a minimum wage employee in a retail context. So that's a little bit of the stuff that we think about. We can drill down on that however you want.
We're talking again with Matt MacInnis, the CEO and co-founder of Inkling. And one of the things that Inkling mentions in some of the write-ups, particularly on your website, is the references to the old way of doing things. Typically in retail in particular, if employees needed up training or to work on some career development tasks, they had to be taken off the floor to the back room. Usually the retailer had some old Packard bells or something waiting for them back there and some antiquated training materials. How is this process, from someone that's really on the ground level of the change of this process, how is this changing to make things more efficient for everyone involved?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, you really dated yourself with the Packard Bell reference. The reality, there's a few different things in play here. Number one, we know that mobile technology is pervasive in the personal lives of every single person who walked across your front door, be they an employee or a customer. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're making a $30,000 salary in a major city where the cost of living is high, you're still finding a way to own a smartphone. So everybody's got one. Everybody's been sort of conditioned to using mobile phone technology to get their work done in their personal lives. So when you show up at work and you're being handed a binder or sat in front of a dusty PC in the back room, it's just not cutting it. And it does lead to real, genuine frustration on the part of that employee. This is not sort of surface level stuff. This creates some negative emotions. So the old way of doing things is in really sharp contrast to what is now the status quo for the average employee in their personal lives. What we've seen our customers doing as we come into our accounts is, they've got paper binders, and they've done what some people call e-learning, where you sit in front of a computer and you click next, through some sort of droning voice talking to you about brand values or about restocking procedures or about sexual harassment training. And it's just this mind-numbing experience that serves to do nothing but turn the employee off for those hours that you're paying them to supposedly be training on how to provide a better customer experience. And you hit the nail on the head a second ago. You said something really important, which is that they end up in the back office. And it's not just the employees who end up in the back office. More often, over time, it's the managers who are stuck in the back office doing email replies to home office, doing revenue reporting. It's just like these very important tasks that need to get done, but they're all constrained to this PC in a windowless room in the back. So the question that we had to ask ourselves was, how do we engage the employee with modern methods of communication in a work context, right? And recognizing that those people are not sitting in front of a computer all day, but now increasingly have access to mobile devices as part of their work. So that was one for the employee. And then the one for the manager was, how do we get the manager out of the back office? How do we get that person out onto the sales floor, shoulder to shoulder with the associates, face to face with customers, and contributing to a better customer experience every single hour that they're on duty at the store? And so to us, the answer was, we got to move all of the procedures, all of the training, all of the stuff that people need access to in the moment. We've got to move that onto a mobile device that can be with you on the floor. And then once it's there, we've got to make it really, really easy for you to jump in and jump out, because the last thing a customer wants is to show up in a retail environment and see an ocean of employees all with their heads buried in mobile phones. That's not going to work either. So it's got to be just in time. It's got to be completely fluid and in support of getting the employee doing what they've got to get done. It's got to be totally transparent, reliable, and it's got to keep people on the shop floor. I mean, those are the key priorities that we put into the design of the software and the way that we implement the technology in each of our customer accounts, whether it's a big box retailer or it's a convenience store operator.
One of the interesting things I think you mentioned is the fact that you've got a number of tasks, and we're not only talking about training here, that can be moved out to the floor or can be moved elsewhere besides the back room. And I know Vera Bradley is one firm that uses Inkling, something like a 99% store active adoption rate, I believe, for them. But one of the things they seem to be really pleased about regarding the platform is the ability to communicate across stores in a region or across the country. And we know generally why it's important to share things like best practices in retail, but how is this process of communicating not only between employees, but also between stores becoming more seamless?
Yeah, so again, it's really about mimicking the day-to-day experience of the employee in their personal life, trying to replicate that in a professional context. So Vera Bradley is a terrific customer of ours. People were using what they would use in their normal lives. They were using Viber or GroupMe or WhatsApp to communicate with one another on an ad hoc basis outside of the sort of approved purview of the parent company. And so it creates all kinds of risks for the employer, but it also was kind of a suboptimal way for them to organize their communication. And so what they did was deploy mobile devices, as you'd expect, tablets and phones into their stores. And that's no small capital investment, right? That's a real commitment on the part of the employer. And then once they did that, they deployed Inkling, and Inkling is used for chat. So they actually communicate across stores in addition to within stores. And then they use it to push tasks down into the stores and then raise issues when things go wrong. And I think the single most, because they've given us permission to go in and observe the communications that are happening within the app, thankfully, which allows us to better understand our own customers. And what we were sort of surprised and delighted by was that a lot of the communication that was happening across stores, when you really free up the managers in a district to have a sanctioned place to communicate about the store and about the business, is that they were really quickly solving problems with one another collaboratively instead of escalating them. So they didn't go up to their boss to figure out a solution. They would just go straight to their peers in other locations and say, hey, I got a partial shipment for this merchandising update. Hey, this hang tag doesn't fit in my window. Or I don't understand what I'm supposed to do in this particular case. What should I do? And they would just get together as a group. They'd have a quick conversation. They'd find a resolution, and they'd be off to the races. And you'd take how long the loops were when they were doing this via email and compress it down into like 10 minutes in real-time chat. And that's just one aspect of what they do, but it's really what drives the 99, I don't know what that other 1% is doing, but the 99% adoption rate that these guys have achieved within their stores on the product, because without it, they just wouldn't be in touch with one another and wouldn't be able to get their work done. It's pretty awesome. It's a significant game changer for the way they operate their stores.
As we kind of wrap it up here, we've talked about the importance of retention, of course, and we've talked about the importance of onboarding when it comes to retention. But one of the things that we often hear from retail employees is having the resources necessary to get their job done, and they become very disenchanted sometimes with their jobs when they feel like they aren't given the resources. And I know that's something that Inkling has kind of baked into their platform, if you will. Just how important was it for you as a company to make sure that employees had these resources to make sure that they were not only able to use the platform well, but also serve as brand ambassadors, so to speak, well?
The customers that we work with tend to have pretty complex organizations and operations. Whether it's rolling out a new product at McDonald's nationally, which you can imagine is a pretty significant undertaking, whether it's a new promotion that's being rolled out at Kohl's, or, very often what we're used at in the benefit cosmetics boutiques is their new product launches. There's a lot of parts to coordinate. And I think the single biggest benefit that you sort of get from the rank and file employee in retail who's using Inkling is that they finally just have one place to go. They just know what they're supposed to do. There's an instinctive reaction. Well, it's probably an Inkling, and 99% of the time they're right. It's just there. So for us, the idea was to design a system that could accommodate all of the different things that an employee needs to get their job done, whether it's training on a new product launch, whether it's a set of tasks that need to be completed for that product launch, whether it's going in and finding the policy information that you need to reference once in a while as a manager. It's like, can we give them a one-stop shop so that they have exactly what they need, knowing where it is, and have it super easy to find? That was kind of the headline goal. And that just drops out a ton of frustration from the experience of the employee in these environments, which are really otherwise very hustle and bustle environments. It's not like, when you don't know what you're supposed to do for something, it's a pretty significant pain in the butt to have to run to the back office log into a computer and start searching through 3 or 4 different systems to see if you can find what you're supposed to do, the least desirable, which being email, right, which is just a pit when it comes to search. So, that was the design goal, and you hit the nail on the head, right? If you have access to everything you need, if you have the resources that you need to be successful, you're probably going to be happier, and you're probably going to be more successful. And I can't think of a sort of more generic but powerful description for what you're looking for with a field employee base of tens of thousands of people. You really want all 10,000 or all 20,000 people to be successful, because that's going to drive top line and bottom line.
Matt MacInnis, again, CEO, co-founder of Inkling. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Retail Focus podcast.
I'm super happy you had us. Thank you.
Has your Google shopping platform been rejected yet again after several tries on getting it uploaded? Does it always seem like there's a problem when updating your product categories, getting the right shopping values, and keeping track of all duplicate values? Do you wish there was a way to make your Google shopping campaigns get accepted instantly without hassles?
Imagine if you were able to have your Google shopping campaigns accurate, auto-corrected, and ready to go. Wouldn't it be nice to stop checking for GTINs and incorrect text or image formats? Keep your focus on selling your products. All this is very possible. You can avoid the most common Google shopping feed errors now in a fraction of the time.
Get the guide on how to launch bulletproof Google shopping campaigns. Get ready to master your Google Merchant Center account with the guide 11 common Google shopping feed errors and how to avoid them. You can download them now on productsup.io/Google-errors. Once again, that's productsup.io/Google-errors. Well, a lot's going on with Target lately as they hosted their annual employee meeting in Minneapolis this week, with a special guest announced plans to expand their workforce by a record 120,000 employees this holiday season, and witnessed yet another unionization effort fall short. So we've kind of clustered all of those stories here into one, and we perhaps start with the biggest news first: their holiday hiring plans. The seasonal hiring plan is one of many in the retail landscape where big-name retailers have started outlining their preparation goals. JCPenney, for one, started holiday hiring extremely early this year. Banners being displayed in front of many of their stores stating that they were hiring. Kohl's, for reference, started hiring all the way back in July. They've actually expressed an interest in hiring additional help over the past 2 years. For Target, though, this is also a grand move. The hiring of 120,000 temporary workers for the holiday shopping season represents a 20% bump over 2017's robust hiring figures. As we'll talk about, not all of these employees are going to be in-store hires, some with e-commerce fulfillment. Last year, we witnessed a lot of record brick-and-mortar sales as well as online sales from legacy stores. And because of this evolving dynamic, that mix of positions, many of Target's temporary staff members were actually placed in distribution centers as well as in areas of the store where customers could pick up online orders quickly and easily. Target has given a more rigid number already this year in terms of distribution need. They're looking to place around 7,500 of those 120,000 workers in centers to load and unload trailers and sort freight. For the in-store online order fulfillment, they're going to allocate nearly double the amount of workers to streamline operations. They will also be employing significantly more for the outside pickup options where customers can drive up and have their orders loaded. We've talked about some of the curbside pickup that Target is reinstituting after rolling back the program a few years ago. And I think, honestly, this is something you're going to see long-term for the holiday season because retailers are getting more buy online, pickup in store orders. And if you've been anywhere near a brick and mortar retailer such as Target, or even going into the grocery segment such as Kroger with their ClickList program, you can see employees buzzing about fulfilling these orders. Same thing goes with Walmart, and I think you're going to see a lot of that in the holiday season, just like you see more associates overall in the holiday season.
I think a common question people are going to have is, how much are these people going to be paid? Those people that are wanting a little bit more cash for the holiday season. Look, they're hiring 120,000 temporary workers. That's going to cost a lot of money for the company, but exactly how much money? Target has seen how wages are going up across the country. We all have, especially over the last 3 to 4 quarters. And as a result, they themselves have been raising the company minimum wage in order to stay competitive. We saw it last year with Costco. We see it with Walmart consistently. From the PR side, this is often a great move for a company Target size, especially Target, $46 billion market cap right now. However, there are some relatively hidden side effects from increasing that hourly wage. One, something that's often missed and something we hear anecdotally is their rising wages in store come with certain caveats for workers with less tenure. For instance, Target has been requiring workers to cover more areas and to really have more open availability when they are scheduled throughout the work week. Also spreading out hours so that team members are working more days per week, but only getting 3 or 4 hour shifts when they would otherwise prefer less days and more hours per day. So all in all, this means that people are getting paid a lot more, often in the teens per hour, but they have a lot less flexibility, and as a result, their home life may suffer. According to official company release, temporary workers this year can actually start at a minimum $12 an hour after next week. Perks include discounts on online purchases as well, 10% there to be exact. They will also get a 20% discount on produce and be eligible for store rewards. So if the store does well, if your local store does well that you're working in, you get bonuses. By the way, Target is also known for having a lot of free lunches during the holiday season as well, especially for the Black Friday events when employees are most taxed or overwhelmed by the sheer amount of people on the sales floor to have to deal with. So you really have to counter these benefits, these perks, if you will, the $12 an hour, the 20% off produce, with the inability to really make your schedule work out for you. So whenever you sign up for these jobs, there may be a little bit lack of flexibility. And this is something you really have to work through. And this is something that if you are interested in working temporarily in the holiday season, you should probably be asking the hiring managers first, hey, is this schedule going to work out? I can only work, let's say, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Is that going to work for you? Is that going to work for me? And then hash it out that way. And this $12 an hour, by the way, is still 20% less than the touted $15 an hour that Target has promised will be their minimum hourly pay by year 2020. Given this increase and comparing it to many state minimum wages, which are fairly lower in some cases, especially throughout the Midwest, it would make sense for them as a company to expect more out of their workers at this rate and be a little more picky also during the onboarding process. So not just the temporary workers, Trent, but the more permanent workers. If they pay that well, then they're probably going to be a little bit more picky, just like Costco is during their hiring process. One great worker that is appreciative of a better wage can really do the company well too, and sometimes offset maybe 2 workers that are just making $9 an hour. So you really have to weigh the pros and cons here in this hourly dynamic. Regardless, wages have been creeping up over the last 2 to 3 years in the industries that we've covered. Wage increases are usually a sign of inflation historically, but this is really only something we have seen bits of in the QSR and FSR space. Target and Walmart have been able to keep staple goods and groceries fairly low in price point. And this is in the face of higher fuel expenses as well, not just wage growth.
Now that we've said all that, for those looking to take advantage of a little extra pay for the holidays, Target is holding hiring functions at stores from October 12th through the 14th. Just like last year, if there's a desire to stay with the company after December, there are likely opportunities to do so. For Target, at least in the near term, the focus has been less on margins, more on garnering market share, and it appears as though that'll continue when it comes to the seasonal market share. During their earnings report a couple of weeks ago, they actually talked about boosting up some of that seasonal market share, not only in the future, but they talked about how important life events seem to have centered increasingly around Target for their customers, including Memorial Day and July 4th. And in this circumstance, no bigger seasonal market share to grab than holiday seasonal market share in November and December. Now, in our opinion, they do a better job at back to school and dorm room furnishing than many of their competitors, talking about, again, those big lifestyle events. And it's all stemmed from getting the message out, having plenty of inventory on hand, and at the bottom line, taking care of the customer, which is what you need those staff members for. And from what it sounds like, Target's preparing its employees with the necessary tools to get the job done in the coming months to the best of their ability. You recall just a few minutes ago on the podcast, back to when we talked about Matt MacInnis, giving resources to employees is absolutely crucial for long-term success for a brand. Now, that's not to say they won't be intently focused on product selection. CEO Brian Cornell always been very transparent about category performance, and he spoke recently about how they've identified toys, just like everyone else has, as a massive opportunity, but an opportunity that there's not really a lot of market inefficiencies surrounding this time around. In fact, I think there may actually be a larger glut of toys in the marketplace than there would have been had Toys R Us stayed open. During their annual employee day, as we shift gears to their annual employee day in Minneapolis this week, Target reportedly brought in Serena Williams and her husband, a Reddit co-founder, to speak in front of 3,000 employees. A large majority in the audience were said to be store managers and other members within senior leadership. Target's big on bringing in known sports figures and celebrities, just like Walmart, in order to motivate management before the holiday rush. Some employees did take to social media to say that Serena's talk was inspiring, which leads us to believe, again, that Target got what they paid for. Now, moving on from that conference, in other news, in a vote that came to a close last week, September 8th, Target workers ended up rejecting a unionization effort that marked a second for a Target store in New York, the store located in Huntington Station, New York.
They had nearly 200 workers that were able to vote, and only 157 ended up showing up for the unionization vote. The first Target store, by the way, in New York that attempted to unionize was in Valley Stream back in 2011. So if you do the quick math there, it's been about 7 years, but the final tally here was rather lopsided, as 118 current store workers decided not to unionize and 39 were in favor. Target came out with a statement shortly after the final result hit major media headlines, and they said that their long-standing belief that a culture of mutual respect in which they resolve issues directly is what is indeed right for their employees. And they said that the employees voted correctly and that their strategy is working, their culture is working. Target has often emphasized an open door culture where employees are encouraged to talk to management about supervisors and general management and about first level manager complaints as well. So it really is an open door policy, and you don't hear a lot of complaints, at least anecdotally, about how they've done things over the last decade or so. The organizing party, for those who are interested, was the UFCW Local 1500. Analysts and spectators alike gave their opinions after the outcome, and the consensus was that the union actually did a poor job of gauging the situation before getting a vote request by the National Relations Board. And some said off the record that it should have been obvious that they weren't able to get enough votes from the very get-go. So basically saying that the union themselves wasted the resources of current members in to try to get this vote going. And all in all, it does seem as though Target is doing enough to make their employees happy, whether from the current labor market tightening up and them having to increase wages, or simply trying to do the right thing for the company and the company image by having that open door policy. And honestly, if you compare their compensation plan and relate it to, let's say, how Costco does their business, they feel as though their investment in staff is an investment in their brand and longevity. So if they have that good, positive PR image, they won't ever need to have a store get unionized because everyone's going to be happy. And most of the time, on average, people are going to vote down a vote to unionize. And I think that's exactly what happened here. The 118 employees decided that, you know what, we feel as though this open door culture of coming to management, whether it's general management or first level management with a complaint, they feel as though their voice is heard. And that is extremely important. A lot of people have that disconnect where they think unionization just means better benefits, better wages. It's not just that, it's representation. If you have a complaint with, let's say, a coworker or management, is it going to get resolved properly and in a mature manner? And I think Target, again, to the previous point, has done a very good job at addressing those internal issues.
We close with another story centered around retail pharmacy, as Walgreens is looking to buy a rather large chunk of pharmacies from Fred's Pharmacy, a southeastern drugstore operator. Stop us if it feels like you've heard this one before. Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, Fred's always seem to be in flux in terms of one buying up another's stores. Fred's Pharmacy has locations in 15 states, centered around states like Florida, Tennessee, and Alabama, but they do have stores as far north as places like Missouri. In addition to all of the stores that Fred's Pharmacy has, they also have 15 franchise locations and 3 strictly pharmacy-only locations without the general merchandise in the front of the store. Beyond the pharmacy division, their front-of-end sales are more discount in nature, unlike the larger Walgreens and CVS. Similar to, I don't know if you remember Drug Warehouse, who is a chain in the same area in the South, or near the same area in the South. They were based out of Oklahoma before a lot of the rights for their stores were purchased by Walgreens, but similar concept there. Discount in nature, not necessarily general merchandise. They've had their fair share of trouble over the last decade, closing dozens of stores. They've posted quarterly losses, and they're searching for a way to fight back against the larger retail pharmacy players. Fred's at one point was going to buy over 800 Rite Aid stores not purchased by the original agreement with Walgreens. Now, once that deal fell through, Fred's took a back seat to those growth plans. As a result, their stock took a hammering. They did receive a small cash payment as a result of the deal falling through, which was cash that they desperately needed, especially with all the legal costs they incurred in the deal. Shares of Fred's Pharmacy, ticker Fred, were down 75% year over year to $1.66 per share, and that was before this deal hit became news, and largely that share decrease was because that Walgreens Rite Aid deal fell through. Now let's talk about this particular deal. News broke on Monday of this week, infusing some much-needed optimism into Fred's stock.
Walgreens is yet again trying to gain market share any way they can, just like CVS in our first story regarding Stater Brothers. And more it means not outright buying physical stores away from other companies like Walgreens had done with Rite Aid. Instead, they are going after what they deem as valuable assets within some current long-standing operators in regions in which they don't have a lot of penetration. While Fred's has reduced their total store count to just around 600 stores right now, they only operate 347 of their own pharmacies. They only operate around half of their total freestanding stores in terms of the pharmacy division. Walgreens, with their massive amount of cash compared to Fred's only $99 million market cap right now, has plenty of cash to make this transaction work. Of the 347 pharmacies that Fred's currently owns and manages, turns out that Walgreens has inked a $165 million deal to secure the files and operations of 185 locations. So roughly half of the number of pharmacies that Fred's currently operates. These pharmacies will be actually in 10 of the 15 states that they do business currently. And just to reiterate, they will not be buying the actual physical stores. So the larger footprint stores that you could relate to a modern CVS or Walgreens, they're just taking over the pharmacy divisions that are going to be in the back of the store, which, as we know, is usually, despite the store footprint or the amount of sales force space it takes up, it's usually the largest chunk of revenue for the conventional retail pharmacy business, around 65 to 70% now, in fact, for those big name pharmacies. What a lot of news outlets are missing out on, and they weren't really highlighting in the official releases, but Fred's formal press release did regarding the sales, that the $165 million deal does not include the individual pharmacy inventory. So that number is actually going to be fluctuating because, think about it, people are still having their scripts filled in the meantime before this deal closes. That inventory is actually going to go up and down, so they can't really ink that part of this deal right now. A lot of people missed that. In fact, I saw several news outlets saying that it included the pharmacy inventories. The deal included the pharmacy inventories, but not the $165 million payment. Additionally, the $165 million is subject to change, as Walgreens is likely allotted a sort of due diligence phase, trying to see the operations more through and through, rather than just saying, yes, we'll get the deal done. Walgreens, being the bigger party, you can think of them having the upper hand in this large transaction. This will leave Fred's, by the way, with 162 pharmacies, if you could do that basic math. So that's 162 pharmacies to run day to day. Not a lot when you consider their 600 stores in the United States. So they're sort of getting out of the pharmacy business. You can look at it like that. Like with the Rite Aid's larger sell-off to Walgreens, this mission here is to use the cash infusion to pay down corporate debt. Fred's Pharmacy, publicly traded company. Obviously, we mentioned the stock quote. You can see inside their financials. You can look at their balance sheet. You can look at their cash flow statements. You can look at a statement as well from Fred's interim CEO and CFO, Joe Anto. He says, with this agreement, we have taken major steps towards achieving one of our main goals of eliminating our debt balance. And Trent, I did a little bit of research. I looked on their last quarterly earnings presentation. On their balance sheet, it showed $175 million in long-term debt and $436 million in total liabilities. Walgreens' payment of $165 million, therefore, could go a long, long way in reducing their long-term debt obligations. And honestly, considering the interest expense alone, that's definitely eating away at their profit potential.
During the same first quarter release, actually, they reported a $19.9 million net loss, a bad overall picture as well in terms of hemorrhaging over $11 million from operations. Now, current Fred's Pharmacy patients that are going to be affected by the potential change will be notified. It is doubtful too much will change in the short to mid-term from the customer side of the transaction. Employees that are currently working at Fred's do not seem to be guaranteed a job in the future. However, they have been told that they can apply to Walgreens to secure an open position. This is actually similar to when Walgreens bought again the properties of Drug Warehouse and related chains like Mays. All the employees were given an opportunity to apply for open positions with the new Walgreens stores. We have a quote before we get to our takes. This is from Walgreens President of Operations Richard Ashworth. He says, and I quote, "This agreement increases patient access to Walgreens pharmacies in the southeastern United States and allows us to introduce more people to Walgreens' trusted pharmacy services in those communities." Now let's talk about some of our questions that we've got here. And one of the underlying questions that should be being asked is, what, beside paying down debt, is Fred's going to do in the coming months and years to create a more sustainable business, including pharmacy sales? Their most recent quarter showed same-store sales declining 3.9%. This was not up against strong comps. This was up against a 4.2% decline in 2017, both declines having occurred at a relatively strong time for retail as a whole. And with this transaction with Walgreens, it's now more unlikely than ever that they'll be purchased outright by another retail pharmacy operator. With multiple deals to have most of their in-store pharmacy operations taken over, a larger buyout of their physical stores would likely prove far too complex and burdensome, and also the benefit wouldn't be there for an external company. So it seems as though there needs to be something. Maybe it's a leadership change, maybe it's a paradigm shift, as costs have remained high for the company, including those selling and administrative expenses. Gross margins have also eroded over time, giving way to the idea that they need to invest in maybe a different product selection or maybe a different approach. With the selling of the 185 pharmacies, they'll now be afforded more flexibility to look more closely at these important features because you have all that extra cash. And with that extra cash and cash flow and more time now given because you've got that cash on hand to focus on the remaining core assets of the business, really no excuse now to not be able to make some meaningful operational strides, no matter how small they may appear in the short term. Now, look, as is the case with most transactions of this size, and especially relating to the pharmaceutical industry, regulators will have to approve, and all stipulated closing conditions have to be met. And this, Leighton, is a huge asterisk because we've seen how regulators have treated the pharmacy industry in the past.
Absolutely. It's one of those industries where regulators really do have a microscope. They're looking to see, are the clients, are the current pharmacy patients, all of those people getting their prescriptions day in and day out, are they going to be negatively affected because Walgreens is too big? They have too big of a share of the pharmacy pie. I think that's an extremely important thing to look at with something like the Rite Aid acquisition. However, for this acquisition, for these 185 stores, I don't think this amount of pharmacy business is going to be so big that anybody, any top regulating body is going to really scratch their heads and say, you know what? I don't think this should happen. However, we turn the page and we see that if all goes well, both companies expect that the bulk of the transfer will occur during the fourth quarter and everything should be finalized by the first quarter of 2019. This is a deal that Fred's absolutely needs. If you look at a generalized picture of their stock price over the last 52 weeks, it does not look good. It does not look good at all. It's a pure dumpster fire. Minus this most recent bump from the news of this Walgreens transaction, you really have to see that this cash infusion is exactly what Fred's Pharmacy needs. Whereas Walgreens, you know what? They can do without it. They have plenty of cash on the balance sheet. They have plenty of market share already. Their biggest competitor, CVS, that's probably what they have their eyes on. They don't really need these 185 pharmacies or the operations, the client lists, etc. Walgreens' share price was almost unfazed as a result this week on the news, up about 1% on Monday, another 1 to 2% throughout Tuesday and Wednesday's trading from last week's trading levels. Shares of Walgreens are down about 14%, by the way, for the trailing 52 weeks, but have experienced doses of positivity beginning in July. The first week of July, the stock really started to take off, and it's been on a run ever since. Shares of Walgreens, ticker WBA, right now around $70. Fred shares, $2.66 per share as of Thursday of this week, whereas this time last year they were over $7. So when you talk about a dumpster fire, that's a share price that has really fallen on hard times. I'm extremely curious to see if this gets passed. I see no reason why it would not. Again, though, Walgreens does have the upper hand. I'm curious to see if anything comes up during the due diligence phase, but it seems as though both companies want to get this over, closed with sooner than later.
As always, we may have a position in or against companies we discuss on the podcast. Do not invest in stocks solely on the input of the podcast hosts.
We close out the retail podcast with a segment we call Looking Ahead, where each Leighton and I take a look ahead at one story we're keeping an eye on over the next week or month. And we start, as always, with Leighton.
Well, GameStop is in the news again, and GameStop has been on our radar over the past few earnings calls because they've been hemorrhaging cash and really not doing so well in terms of same-store sales. However, now it appears through an article this last week that they are mulling through their options, their future options, possible alternatives for the company, and potentially looking to sell the company, Trent. So this is interesting because they are a publicly traded company. However, some are talking about them maybe being taken private. And this company has actually been operating without top leadership over the last couple of months. And taking it private could mean a couple of things for GameStop. If you think about their debt structure, if it's taken private, it's not going to be that much of a concern. Also, let's say it's taken private, they can more easily maybe do some financial haggling and then be able to file bankruptcy and close some of the more expensive leased locations throughout the country. Think about Mattress Firm. We talked about this company not that long ago. They were actually bought by a South African firm, and now, many months later, after that acquisition, they're mulling over the options for bankruptcy and closing those very expensive locations. If you think of GameStop and the real estate that they have, or at least the shopping centers that they're in throughout the country, they're always going to be in a very expensive Class B, Class A, common suite area. And I think it's going to be interesting as to how they consolidate real estate going forward, because that has been a topic of conversation with the executives. So for me, you're looking at a company in GameStop that has faced a ton of competition from online competitors. How do they navigate that? How do they become a little bit more agile, bring those online customers to their physical stores? And you have to ask yourself, how many physical stores do they really need? You know, if you're in a location with not a lot of traffic or waning traffic levels, you may want to close that location down, especially those indoor malls. They're still in a lot of B and C class malls, those old conventional indoor malls throughout the country. I'm extremely curious to see how this works out for the company. But for those current investors, it has been a rocky ride. We talked about a rocky ride with Fred's Pharmacy. GameStop is no different.
Well, what I'm looking ahead to is Sears Holdings, and no, not store closures, as we often talk about in this section, but it's interesting because Eddie Lampert, on their second quarter news release, stated that actually comp sales positive thus far in the third quarter. Now, look, it positive against very, very easy comps to go against in last year's third quarter, but at the same time, this would mark the first quarter of positive comp growth in a very long time if they can hold on. So could it be that they've shed enough stores to this point to actually show positive comp growth, or is it a simple blip on the radar caused by the back-to-school season? Only time will tell, and only their third quarter results will tell. Will it be enough to keep from closing more stores, and will it be enough to salvage the franchise? I don't honestly think so, but I'm anxious to see if there is positive comp growth. Even if it is an outlier, it might be just a kind of a relic type throwback to a bygone era. A reminder that comps aren't everything in this circumstances. They're still losing money hand over fist, but it would be interesting to see them put up a full quarter of positive comps for the first time in a long time. Well, that'll do it for us here on the Retail Focus podcast. A big thanks to Matt MacInnis, again, CEO and co-founder of Inkling, for joining us on today's podcast. We also thank Productsup.io, Myemma.com, and AdRoll, the e-commerce growth platform, for helping support the podcast. We'll be back 1 week from today with more retail content.
This has been the Retail Focus Podcast. For more, visit our website at retailfocuspodcast.com and subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. Follow us on Twitter at Retail Podcast.